If it's Boeing, I ain't going, which is what a lot of people say. But the reality is there's about 115,000 commercial airplanes that take off and land every day. And really, it's going to be quite difficult to avoid flying in a Boeing plane, even if you're concerned about their safety standards and everything else that's been going on lately, because they own about roughly 42% market share of all the planes that are created. And if you want to get from point A to point B, you might just have to do it. But today I want to talk about the machinist strike and what's going on at Boeing, and also how the organization is reacting to that. Well, heads up, spoiler, they're now thinking about doing layoffs as well, which seems like it's layoff week, and this is the main news that's coming out about these organizations. I wish I could have good news for you about these companies growing and hiring and paying people a ridiculously high salary and way, way more than a living wage. But I can only report on the news, and the news lately is just full of companies battling with their employees and ultimately letting them go. So let's talk about what's going on lately with Boeing, and let's go over a couple of articles. Let's dive in. Our first article is from apnews.com. And as always, the articles I reference are listed down in the description below, so you can read the whole thing for yourself. I'm just going to go over the parts that pertain to our discussion for today. The headline of this article is, Boeing says it's considering temporary layoffs to save cash during the strike by machinists. And the article goes on to say, Boeing plans to freeze hiring and reduce travel and is considering temporary layoffs to save cash during a factory workers' strike. That began last week, the company told employees on Monday. The company said the moves, which include reduced spending on suppliers, were necessary because our business is in a difficult period. Chief Financial Officer Brian West detailed 10 immediate cutbacks in a memo to employees. They include a freeze on hiring across all levels, pausing pay increases for managers and executives who get promoted, and stopping all travel that isn't critical. So it's tricky because some people will say, if you're not being treated fairly, start a union, fight back, stand up for your rights. And does that really always work out in the end? Not really. But we see Boeing, they're thinking about different things. It's interesting, even with the union and people standing up for their rights, they still aren't immediately going to 100% we're laying off people. It seems like they're trying to cut back in other ways, which is really what you would think you would see with other companies. But I feel like most companies are so quick to just jump into terminating, firing, laying off, whatever the term you want to use, their hardworking employees. I mean, how often do we read an article, and we read an article all the time, but how often on these reports do we see that they're going to be doing a hiring freeze? No, we hear that they're posting jobs, they're going to give everybody help, and then we really dive into it and we see that they're not actually hiring people. These are just ghost jobs and postings that stay listed for months at a time with no reality of ever hiring anybody. Pausing pay increases. I mean, we see that people aren't getting raises or promotions unless they go somewhere else. Even recently, we talked about a driver promotion where companies are going out and they're giving more workload and more responsibility to people without actually giving them more money. And stopping all travel that isn't critical, which is, I think, a good thing to do. Like, hey, if we're struggling, let's cut back on maybe lunches and happy hours and parties, maybe get rid of the party planning committee. I mean, these are all things that make sense. That it's weird that we don't see when we talk about other companies that go straight to, hey, can we lay off 10 to 15 to 20% of our workers? Let's do that first. And who's to decide what's critical? I mean, if the CEO wants to fly his private jet to work every day, I guess he's got to get to work, right? We are also considering the difficult step of temporary furloughs for many employees, managers, and executives in the coming weeks. So as this plays out with Boeing, it's going to be interesting to see what actually happens. Because I believe the original premise and concept of a layoff was supposed to be this term furlough, where, hey, things are not in a good place right now, we're kind of struggling, or maybe this season isn't giving us as much sales as possible, so we're going to have to lay you off temporarily, and then in a few months when we get back on our feet, we can hire you guys back. But these days, layoffs are just a fancy way of saying firing. Like, it's not like you're going to be gone for 3 to 6 months, you're gone for good. So if they take the next step after all these cost-cutting measures and they go with furloughs, it'd be interesting to see if people really just lose their job for a couple months and then they're invited back. Boeing's business is in a difficult spot, he said, adding the strike jeopardizes our recovery in a significant way. About 33,000 workers represented by the International Association of Machinists and Aerospace Workers began a strike early Friday. The walkout came after workers rejected an offer of a 25% increase in pay over 4 years. The union originally saw a pay hike of at least 40%. And this is where I want to hear from you guys, maybe anyone who's worked at Boeing or worked in a similar industry. What is the typical pay increase that you are to expect? Because in tech, we're lucky if we get a 3% increase, which usually doesn't even keep up with inflation, but certainly nothing's guaranteed. I couldn't imagine working at a company and then getting a 25% increase at all, nonetheless a 40% increase. And you got to think with all the bad publicity Boeing has received this year that they're not making as much money as they used to, and maybe 40% is a little bit unreasonable. I don't really know, but let me know down in the comments below. Representatives of the company and the union are scheduled to meet Tuesday with federal mediators. The union has started to survey its members to learn what they want most in a new contract. And the same thing with contracts. I've never been a part of a union, but with a tech contract, especially if you're in a right to work state, or maybe anywhere in the US, the employer doesn't have to honor that contract. They could sign you for a year contract and let you go in 9 months. Trust me, it's happened to me. And it's not a two-way street even with a general hiring arrangement, because they will look down upon you and say bad things about you and feel like you're abandoning them if you don't give them a 2-week notice. But then the employers can just say, hey buddy, today's your last day, time to go. Pack your things and get out of here. And that seems to be perfectly acceptable by them. The article says striking workers are picketing at several locations around Washington state, Oregon, and California. Outside Boeing's huge factory in Everett, Washington, Nancy Browning, a materials management specialist at Boeing for more than 17 years, said last week's offer was worse than the one that prompted a 2-month strike in 2008. She said that without annual bonuses that workers have come to depend on, the proposed pay increase was more like 9%, not 25%. We just want a piece of the pie like everybody else, she said. Why should we work all this overtime and bust our backs while these guys, Boeing executives, are sitting up in their suites just raking in the cash? So I'd love to hear more about how this works. Are they just on salary and they're just expected to work overtime? Because if you look from the tech departments and tech industry, you would see that we are giving our salaries based off of working 40 hours. But it's unfortunately not realistic to only work 40 hours. You're working 60, 70, 80 hours sometimes, and you're not getting paid overtime because you're a part of a salary. Is this the same thing with these machinists at Boeing, where they're like, hey, we're giving you all these extra hours and we're not getting paid? Or is it that some people are just on hourly and they are getting overtime, but then in addition to that, I don't know if they're getting time and a half or what's going on, but in addition to that, then they're wanting additional increases up to 40% on their base salary? Because if you're getting paid time and a half or overtime and then you want additional base salary, I mean, that's not a world that I can really relate to, unfortunately. The article goes on to say that the bonuses have emerged as a flashpoint for union members. Workers say they range from $3,000 to $5,000 a year. And I'm not sure, maybe once, but I really don't remember ever getting a bonus in technology. Like I said, I can't say that it's never happened once, but if it did, I certainly don't remember it. nor do I remember getting a 25% pay increase. So maybe I need to learn how to fix Boeing planes. Boeing says it is hard to calculate bonuses in a way that is fair to 33,000 people who perform different jobs. So instead, the company proposes to ditch the payouts and replace them with automatic contributions of $4,160 per year to each employee's 401k retirement account. Workers are bitter that in contract extensions over the past 16 years, Boeing ended its traditional pension plan and lowered healthcare benefits. "We want our pension back," says Jacob Bustad, a machinist with Boeing for 14 years, who was also on the picket line in Everett. "We just keep losing and we never gain, while the people at the top just get more and more money. Boeing has done really good for me and my family, but these last years have been hard." So in addition to yearly bonuses and 25% pay increases, they're also getting money maybe deposited into their 401k, or they are getting like pensions at all. I mean, yeah, I'm always gonna be pro worker, pro employee, but dang, this is like a whole nother world. In tech, I've never experienced any of this kind of stuff. There's no way I'm gonna get a pension anywhere. I'm probably not gonna get Social Security. I've never gotten a raise or a big time financial promotion. And yeah, I'm definitely not getting bonuses. So I don't know, man. From the outside looking in, it sounds like these workers already got it pretty good. The article goes on to say, Boeing has lost more than $25 billion since the start of 2019 and burned through $4.3 billion in the second quarter of 2024 alone, as it stood poised to post another money-losing year. The strike will delay deliveries of new planes, which are an important source of cash for the company. So at first swipe, I read through that pretty quick, but dang, the company has lost $25 billion since 2019 and $4.3 billion in the second quarter of this year. Yeah, it doesn't sound like the company is going to be in a good financial place to give the workers all of their demands. So we talk about this all the time. You got to look at the financials. You got to look at the reportings. You got to follow the stock prices, because unfortunately you can't have unrealistic expectations and think that you're going to be able to cash out on a company that's losing money hand over fist. Stephanie Pope, the head of Boeing's commercial airlines division, cited the company's $60 billion in total debt in urging blue-collar workers to accept the contract offer last week. She called it the best offer Boeing has ever made and endorsed by the union's local president and negotiators. But workers rejected the recommendation of their own leaders, which had not happened since 1995. Additional cost-cutting moves spelled out in the chief financial officer's memo, including eliminating first and business class service for anyone on travel that is deemed critical, and stop spending on outside consultants. So like I said, I definitely want to hear from anyone who is closer to this situation, but just reading this report, if all these things are true, yeah, I mean, I don't know. Seems kind of hard to completely side with the workers on this one when Boeing seems to be doing other things to cut costs. They say that they're not going to be spending any more money on travel or raises, and that they're not spending money on outside consultants. When if this was the tech, you'd show up on a random Friday and you'd get laid off, and then you might not get any sort of severance package. You wouldn't get any sort of heads up. You wouldn't get all these other kind of benefits. And then in addition to that, all of the work would go to outside consultants. They would offshore or nearshore your position in a heartbeat. West also said Boeing plans to make significant reductions in supplier expenditures and will stop most supplier purchase orders related to the 737, 767, and 777 models. After the strike started, Moody's put Boeing on review for a possible credit downgrade, and Fitch said a strike longer than 2 weeks would make a downgrade more likely. Both agencies rate Boeing's debt one notch above non-investment or junk status. So what are your thoughts on this? I would love to hear in the comments down below. Do you currently work at Boeing, or have you worked at Boeing in the past and you have some insider knowledge? Because I'd love to hear where my assumptions were wrong, because that's all they were, assumptions. I've never worked there, but I can only compare it to what I've seen and what I've been through in technology in the States. Also, how do you feel as a consumer? After the incident of January 5th, are you looking to fly with just different aircraft carriers? Are you actively looking at what plane that they're using and determining whether you want to fly or not? Do you feel unsafe? Are you one of these people who says that if it's Boeing, I ain't going? Or do you feel like it was just a one-off incident and you're not really going to be too worried or too concerned about it? Also, how do you feel about this whole strike situation? Does it seem unusual to you? Do you think that Boeing will cave in and give the workers the demands they're asking for? Or do you think that the union is out of line and that they're eventually going to have to cave in and just accept whatever offer Boeing is giving them? Love to hear all of your insights and all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Talk to you later.